Hi, everyone. Thanks for this invitation. I'm happy to share my thoughts today at the World City Conference. This past year really underscored the vital importance of public space for sustaining wellness, building, maintaining community connections, and enhancing the livability of our cities. I'm Jeanne Gang, and I'm really passionate about how architecture actually sets the stage for these better relationships. It was Winston Churchill who said it best when he stated that we shape our buildings, thereafter they shape us. So today I want to demonstrate how we can use design strategies to shape not only buildings, but cities to be more inclusive and more equitable as well. I just wanted to start with a little bit of history of our urban realm in the recent past. This is an image of the 20th century city, let's say Chicago here, my hometown. Huge roads designed exclusively for the use of the private car. This started showing up in the 1960s, and they're still here. They take up a lot of space, and this space should belong to everyone. But roads, of course, are necessary. I know that. My dad was a civil engineer who designed them. But the vast space of the car actually requires this separation between parts of the city and between people and each other. So we saw, fast forward to the pandemic in 2020, that this spacing people out further and further came down to the human scale, where gathering was forbidden. Space that were formerly generous, like the Grand Central Station, were taken away, and trying to reduce this proximity to each other. Initially, you got this eerie apocalyptic sense of the abandoned city, like Millennium Park, which is one of the most thriving public spaces in Chicago, was suddenly empty like this. And so with these aspects of distancing people further and further apart, what is really the future of public space and what is needed? Why is it vital to our society, and how can we change it for the better post-pandemic? So while the pandemic enforced this social distancing, it was actually these large public open spaces that made it possible to do that. And during the last year, we saw more and more full use of public outdoor spaces here along the Chicago lakefront in 2020. According to the Brookings Institute, outdoor recreational activity increased 291% during the lockdown relative to the 3-year average. And public space was also crucial for large public demonstrations, an important element of our democracy, like the protests after the killing of George Floyd here in Chicago again. These flexible public spaces add resiliency to our society. And there were some other benefits, like the increase in public transportation for bikes and bike lanes, over 100 miles added in Chicago. And when I returned to my Paris office, I saw a completely transformed city with everyone on bikes like Denmark. It was really amazing. And balconies as a feature that I've championed for years as an architect really came into focus for social life during quarantine, not only like these musicians in Milan that use them, but also for cheering on hospital staff as they were coming home. Our work has included a lot of balconies over the years, sometimes not that easy to achieve, but here, these came into high use, like the Tower building in Chicago that we completed, but also City Hyde Park, which is a project in Hyde Park in Chicago with many balconies that allowed people to have this threshold space and really create the pattern on the building that makes it feel lively. As well as our Mirror Tower in San Francisco that has balconies with different views running up and down the length of the tower. But how do we make public space equitable? A little background, my practice, I created Studio Gang, which is an architecture and urbanism practice, over 2 decades ago, and we have offices in several cities working across a big spectrum of projects, like the Aqua Tower in Chicago with balconies galore, I guess, and then also museums like the American Museum of Natural History in New York, where we designed a new wing that is currently under construction. Cultural spaces, university spaces, higher education spaces like these residence halls at the University of Chicago Campus North, civic cultural spaces like the Writers Theater in Glencoe. But along my path, I've been really interested in activating communities, and our practice has focused also on urban centers with an emphasis on how architecture and urban design can come together to create stronger social connections and better public places for all. Social relationships that happen in public space is what we need right now to combat loneliness, to air out our problems, and to mend social divides. In fact, all our projects, even with the towers, we're looking for ways to connect communities and create environments that reduce climate change and create better outcomes that are welcoming for everyone. Like this C40 competition we recently won in downtown Chicago to provide affordable housing for essential workers in the loop, but it's also a zero carbon project right in the middle of downtown. And even tall buildings can participate in making a better public realm. This, of course, is the Regis Tower in St. Regis Tower in Chicago. And it's really a tower that's permeable at the base. It is open, and there's a public connection to the public space at the base. It's located along the Chicago River, but also along this kind of 1 mile axis coming from the Field Museum looking north. What's interesting about that is it participates both in the skyline of the building, but also along the river's edge. And here it is along the skyline on cold morning. And this is the way that it works along the river's edge. So there's a public connection at the base of the building that connects the pedestrians at multiple levels. And here you can see a section through the building where the Chicago River is on the right, the Lakeshore East Park on the left, and people can get through this. So it's a way of modifying this kind of heavy automobile infrastructure that was already there and making it more usable by the public. And the building really responds to these spaces and makes an opportunity to connect to this riverfront, a riverfront that is so much more used since the pandemic, but also very extensive. And it was such a great investment for a city to make it possible for people to come outside and connect to nature. This is also something that reduces the stress and anxiety of being inside. On another project that connects nature to the city, which is another aspect of resiliency post-pandemic, it was pre-pandemic and post-pandemic even more important, is the Lincoln Park Zoo Nature Walk. We were asked to design a pavilion for this park that's part of the Lincoln Park Zoo. But when we started this project, we really thought about how to make it really more of a place. So it wasn't just the pavilion, which you can see kind of in the center of the screen looking down, but this entire South Pond network of walkways and connections to nature right in the middle of the city. And so to do that, we worked together with ecologists, engineers, and hydrologists to re-engineer this pond so that it could perform as a resiliency space for climate change. In other words, it's part of this ecosystem services that holds stormwater and holds it there, reducing the pressure on gray infrastructure, but also provides a habitat, a network. And this is something that's going to be even more important going forward, where these blue-green networks are going to be necessary to increase buffers, places for animals, insects to be within cities and without cities, to increase buffers with human populations, but also bring people in connection, visual connection with nature. And because of that project, the Lincoln Park Zoo actually started a program to study urban nature. And these are some of the activities going on: recording for bats, trail cameras to see who's there. And it turns out that this project has really increased the capacity of the pond to house wildlife, including birds. This is from eBird, where you can see the number of species of 183 species spotted at Lincoln Park, South Pond, but also this group of nesting black crowned night herons, which has increased in population and uses the space fully, which is a pleasure to see every year. And then Trail Cam has caught other mammals within the city who are, increasingly having a space to be and not being exposed into urban concrete jungles. They're really able to thrive within the city limits. The pavilion itself was highly prefabricated, and it allows natural light in and just creates a shelter for people to be in the space. Another place that was highly used during the pandemic, this project was completed in 2010. It has really become a beloved destination for the city. And it's used in many different ways for different activities, and flexibility is another aspect of this post-pandemic, but it was pre-pandemic too for us. But I think a quality that really will become more and more necessary, the flexibility of open public space. One time, the Dîner en Blanc group, which is like a last minute dinner that you get together and you bring a picnic and eat outside, inhabited the entire length of the South Pond Boardwalk in a way that I don't think any of us that designed it really imagined it could be used, but it was so wonderful to see it being used in that way. So we really have a full ecosystem here. It's about relationships between people, but also the relationships to their natural world. Can we make public space more equitable for everyone? In the city of Chicago, the Mayor's Office of Violence Reduction asked us to look at activating a neighborhood in West Garfield Park. So collaborating with Golden Institute and many others, we took on this project to understand how design and public space could work to prevent violence. And in Chicago, this is the location here on the west side of West Garfield Park. And what we found was that this was a part of the city that was once thriving with activity and really a proud place. And what had happened was after the 1960s, after the riots in the 1960s, there was a lot of buildings were torn down and cleared out, and it was this act of so-called urban renewal that really had negative impacts on this neighborhood. So a lot of vacancy today, and as well as blight and violence. And so to do this project, we really worked together with many different community groups, and it was important to understand what they wanted to see in the neighborhood. So it's really about listening first before deciding and putting a project somewhere, but working together with these community groups. Our team listened and heard what was working, what wasn't in the neighborhood, and we came to identify that in working in neighborhoods like this, there's always something positive that's already happening that's there. There might be some things missing, and it's really about connecting the dots and finding out how to fill in this flower, if you will, with the different petals to map out a way forward and a way for success. In this instance, on the corner of Madison and Pulaski, we found some vacant lots, but there was also a school, and it was an area that was experiencing some violence, and it was really about creating a more safe space and networking these given assets together. And so we, working with our teams, imagined what could inhabit these vacant places. And one of the things the community came up with was wanting a roller rink. And so the mayor of Chicago, who's really focusing on the west side and the south side of the city, really supported this idea. At first, she couldn't believe that they wanted a rolling rink, and it turned out that was the favored thing. So by working together with communities and understanding what it is that they want and they need, I think designers can help facilitate a more equitable city and public space. So this actually opened this summer, a roller rink that was visited and used by all, and very kind of a quick project, but just the beginning of what this new network can be like in West Garfield Park. Other buildings that I think will be more and more needed going forward for public space are buildings that are reused. This is the Beloit College Powerhouse, which was a power plant, a coal burning power plant in the city of Beloit, where you have a college, Beloit College, up on this hill, the Rock River going through, and the Town and Gown Classic Division along this river. And for years, this power plant was really important to the economy of the area, but then went into disrepair as it was not able to meet the current EPA guidelines. So if you imagine a building of this scale, really an industrial scale, can oftentimes be, if it's not in use, it's really causing a kind of blight as well, because it's an abandoned space that takes up so much area and is not used. And this one has such a key location right on the Rock River. And so the college, Beloit College, was able to purchase the building for a low amount and really create 3 programs in one inside the building. It's a student union, it's a health center, and a recreation center for student use. And so we renovated and preserved some of the historic elements of the building, created a new pedestrian passage from campus over to the building, and added this field house. And it's a track, a running track that kind of knits all parts together. What I think is interesting here is really that you have an old building that was in disrepair, and it's able to accommodate so many things in such a generous scale. And at the same time, reusing the building is really reducing the embodied carbon of the building. Here, we also used a river water heat exchange to reduce the operational carbon of the building, but reusing the building itself keeps carbon out of the atmosphere. This is what it looked like before. You can see the scale of it really meant for giant machines. And here, and you can see some of the areas that were in disrepair, and here's the new project. So this opened right as the pandemic was coming on, and it was key. It was a key building that allowed the college to continue to gather in a safe way because of the scale of this building. And now it's really a continuity of a river walk, a continuity of access for accessibility for disabled people as well, because the interior elevator is publicly accessible, so you can get from one level to the other in a city using this elevator. And I think Beloit College is very happy to be using this building, and it really kept them functional during the pandemic. Here's a view inside with the running track going through, and some of the original equipment that's maintained inside the building. That's just an incredible scale that I think the students really enjoy. This is their competitive pool that is in that space that had the hole in the ceiling. Okay, and then I wanted to talk about, to conclude with a project that is for Memphis, a city along a river again. And it's a city where we were asked to really rethink the relationship to the river. Again, we see the evidence of the 20th century, the automobile with huge roads, but look at the scale of the river. It's so wide. This is the Mississippi, and it actually changes level about 50 feet from low to high levels. So it's a variable, it's a living piece of our environment that the city had originally turned its back on. In this image, you can see the river on the left and Front Street on the right. So most of the buildings in Memphis oriented toward Front Street, and the riverfront was really more like a loading dock. You can see the Cobblestone Landing here. And so as we helped Memphis to imagine what the future could be like with a reorientation toward the river, luckily this project began pre-pandemic and was well on its way, and is really positioning Memphis. It's going to transform the way Memphis relates to the river and position it well for the 21st century and climate change. One interesting thing we found as we started to look at the riverfront was this area, which is the Cobblestone Landing, is about 600 feet long. And it was, when we began this, it was right around the time when this movement called Take 'em Down was starting to address these kind of very disturbing monuments that from Civil War era monuments that were actually not from the Civil War, but from the 1960s as well, and trying to think about taking them away. And so as we started thinking about how this could be a new public space along the Mississippi River, we also wanted to ask ourselves, how could you work on a space with a difficult history? We found in the historic studies of the site that the Cobblestone Landing was once a place of trade, and so therefore there was a cotton industry that used the landing. So it means that enslaved people once worked there, and so it's a difficult history. It also was once a parking lot. It's had many different identities. It was the place where World War I soldiers' caskets came back to Memphis in 1916 as well. So there are many identities this place, and we were interested in how to make an inclusive design process that would be a new way to identify a public space and to make it welcoming to everyone. And so this project started with this research, and we ended up speaking with a number of people, including Tammy Sawyer, who was sharing her story here. She's the one that started the Take 'em Down movement, and we decided to ask different Memphians what they thought about their city, and to help them give us a clue as designers what is important to them today. And so working with a number of different citizens from Memphis, we learned many different things. This is Elmore Nickelberry on the right, who was marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the I Am a Man March, and he still works for the city of Memphis. And everyone had amazing stories. We kind of recorded those stories. So I think part of being an architect in the future is going to be listening to people and be better listeners, so that we can translate these incredible moments into stories for our cities. So we took those cobblestones and started to change them, try to embed the stories within them. We called them the story stones. And this was our first act of design for the Memphis waterfront. And we actually showed this project at the Venice Biennale and shared the stories that the Memphians had told us about. And as that project progresses, we started on this large element of the waterfront called Tom Lee Park. And Tom Lee Park is now under construction. The site was a man-made filled area along the Mississippi River, and It's named after Tom Lee, who was a hero who saved, I think it was 36 people from drowning in the Mississippi River. And he himself could not swim. He was an African-American man, and he went back and forth in his boat to bring people to shore. And so it's dedicated to him. And the current use of the site was really just for some music festivals and outdoor festivals, but that was the only attraction. So the city of Memphis asked us to work with Memphians and to determine what uses could be on the site. We spoke with many people and also created this youth design leadership group from a local high school to help kind of engage with us about what could actually be there. And it was really, I think this is a way to make these future public spaces more resilient in that they're the spaces that people want. And so the current version of the park incorporates the outdoor lawns for the events, as you can see dotted along this long expanse, but also introduces areas for gathering, flexible areas that can be used in multiple ways, connections to the ecology, and bringing people closer to the river and more engaged with the river ecology. Some of the architectural inspirations came from the working waterfront and the way that materials were used along the Mississippi. We're creating a canopy walk there that will be a place that connects people to the tops of the trees and the migration of the birds along the Mississippi Flyway. We also created a pavilion in the park that is very flexible for different uses, including sports like basketball, but also yoga and music and a variety of activities, which is something that the kids and others said they wanted here. Just to conclude, I think that one of the things we often think about it's like how the waterfront, how cities engage with public space along waterfronts. If you think back, using Chicago again as an example, in the 1890s, the waterfront was really defined solely by industry and private industry, private companies, rail lines, not about shared space. In fact, it would be very hard for anyone walking along to even get to this waterfront. So the resources were devoted to private space. And we think that if we think about this transformation that is now happening in cities and how improving the air quality, improving and decreasing the traffic that we saw actually happen during COVID, it proves that a more compact city is actually a more resilient city. We could create urban boundaries, growth boundaries that would help us to prioritize and reduce the risk of new pandemics by making it possible to use less transportation and create less pollution in the air. And if you think now, 100 years later, we really have a lakefront, which is a shared resource, and that we can continue to think about ways that public space can address issues of climate change, but also address issues of inequity and help us to mend our social divides. So our work has really been driven by a care for the environment, and I do believe that the two elements of social and environmental can directly come together and be related and improved through the public realm. Thank you very much.